Marcus Williams pushed his worn-out Honda Civic into the parking lot of Iron Paradise Gym at exactly 5:30 a.m. The engine made that familiar coughing sound that reminded him he needed repairs he couldn't afford. He sat for a moment in the dim morning light, staring at the gleaming luxury cars parked near the entrance. BMW sedans, Mercedes coupes, and even a bright red Ferrari that belonged to some tech executive who bragged loudly about his latest business deals. Marcus grabbed his faded gym bag from the passenger seat. The zipper had been broken for months, held together with a safety pin his 8-year-old daughter Emma had decorated with colorful stickers. Inside were his old workout clothes, a water bottle he'd refilled countless times, and a towel that had seen better days. Everything about his appearance screamed that he didn't belong in this upscale fitness center. But Marcus had earned his membership through an employee discount program at the office building, where he worked as a night janitor. The automatic doors swooshed open, releasing a blast of air conditioning and the sound of expensive equipment humming. Marcus nodded to Jessica at the front desk, a college student who always gave him a genuine smile, unlike some of the other staff members who looked right through him. She was one of the few people who knew his story, how he'd been coming here for 3 years, always during the early morning hours before his daughter woke up and before the gym filled with its usual crowd of wealthy professionals. Walking toward the locker room, Marcus caught sight of himself in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. His reflection showed a man in his early 30s with calloused hands and tired eyes, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and shorts he'd bought at a discount store. His shoes were clean but old, the kind that screamed blue-collar worker to anyone paying attention. He'd lost weight since starting his gym routine, trading his soft middle-aged spread for lean muscle, but his clothes still hung loose on his frame because he couldn't afford new ones. The locker room buzzed with conversation from the usual morning crowd. Marcus recognized most of them by now, even though they'd never bothered to learn his name. There was Bradley, the investment banker who spent more on his workout supplements than Marcus made in a week. Next to him stood Connor, a real estate developer who never missed a chance to talk about his latest property acquisition. These men belonged to a world Marcus could only observe from the outside, a world of expense accounts and country club memberships. As Marcus changed into his workout clothes, he overheard Bradley complaining about his housekeeper asking for a raise. The man was genuinely confused why someone would want more than minimum wage for cleaning his 5-bedroom house. Connor laughed and shared his own story about firing a maintenance worker for asking to leave early for his kid's school play. Neither man noticed Marcus listening, or if they did, they didn't care. To them, he was invisible, just another working-class guy who somehow found his way into their exclusive space. Marcus had developed his own routine over the years, carefully timed to avoid the peak hours when the gym filled with people who made him feel like an outsider. He preferred the quiet early morning, when he could focus on his workout without judgment or sideways glances. His routine was simple but effective, built around compound movements that gave him the most benefit for his limited time. He had exactly 90 minutes before he needed to get home, shower, wake Emma up, make her breakfast, and get her ready for school. The weight room was his sanctuary, the one place where money and social status couldn't lift the barbell for you. Here, dedication and consistency mattered more than designer workout clothes or expensive personal trainers. Marcus had learned everything through YouTube videos and fitness forums, studying form and technique with the same intensity he'd once applied to his college engineering courses, before life forced him down a different path. He started with his warm-up routine, light cardio on the treadmill while watching the morning news on the mounted television. The anchor was discussing the city's economic growth, featuring interviews with successful business owners and entrepreneurs. Marcus wondered if any of them had ever worried about choosing between paying the electric bill or buying their child new school shoes. Probably not, but he tried not to let bitterness creep into his thoughts. He'd learned that resentment was just another weight that would slow him down. Moving to the weight area, Marcus began his workout with methodical precision. Every rep was controlled, every set carefully counted. He'd developed incredible focus over the years, the ability to tune out everything except the iron in his hands and the goals in his mind. Other gym members came and went around him, some barely breaking a sweat during their social hour disguised as exercise, others working with expensive personal trainers who provided more motivation than actual knowledge. Marcus had been lifting seriously for 3 years now, ever since Emma's mother left them with nothing but debt and heartbreak. Exercise had become his therapy, his escape, and his way of proving to himself that he could still accomplish something meaningful. Every pound he lifted, every mile he ran, every drop of sweat was a small victory in a life that had dealt him more than its share of defeats. The other gym members rarely acknowledged his presence, which suited Marcus fine. He wasn't there to make friends or network his way into better opportunities. He was there to maintain his physical and mental health, so he could be the father Emma deserved. She was everything to him, the reason he worked double shifts, the motivation behind every sacrifice he made. When she looked at him, she didn't see a janitor or a man struggling to make ends meet. She saw her hero, the dad who never missed a school event, who helped with homework every night, who made pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings. As Marcus finished his first set of exercises, he noticed the gym starting to fill with the usual morning crowd. Soon the weight room would echo with loud conversations about stock options and vacation homes. But for now, in these quiet moments before the invasion of privilege, Marcus could focus on becoming stronger, both for himself and for the little girl who believed he could do anything. The morning crowd began filtering into Iron Paradise around 6:15 a.m., transforming Marcus's peaceful workout space into something that felt more like a social club for the wealthy. He moved efficiently between exercises, trying to complete his routine before the weight room became too crowded and uncomfortable. The conversations grew louder as more people arrived, each trying to outdo the others with stories of business success and expensive purchases. Bradley Hutchinson made his grand entrance wearing pristine workout gear that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly grocery budget. His personal trainer, Kyle, followed close behind, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of eager expression that came with being paid $300 an hour to count to 10 and provide encouragement. Bradley owned a chain of high-end restaurants and never let anyone forget it, especially the working-class people he encountered during his daily routine. "Kyle, my man, I'm feeling explosive today," Bradley announced loudly enough for half the gym to hear. "That new protein powder I'm importing from Switzerland is incredible. Costs $400 per container. But when you're serious about results, you don't cut corners." He glanced around the room, clearly hoping others were listening to his casual mention of expensive supplements. Marcus continued his workout nearby, focusing on his bench press routine. He'd worked his way up to pressing his own body weight, a milestone that had taken him 2 years of consistent training to achieve. No fancy supplements, no expensive trainer, just dedication and the kind of determination that came from having real responsibilities and limited options. Connor Blackwell arrived shortly after Bradley, immediately launching into a phone conversation about a commercial real estate deal. He paced around the gym while talking, his voice carrying across the entire floor as he discussed moving millions of dollars around like Monopoly money. When he finally hung up, he spotted Bradley and immediately walked over to continue their ongoing competition of who could sound more successful. "Just closed on that downtown property I told you about," Connor said, adjusting his designer fitness tracker. $12.5 million. Not bad for a Tuesday morning. He looked around to see who might be listening, his eyes briefly passing over Marcus without acknowledgement. The seller was some old guy who didn't understand the property's real value. "Sometimes I almost feel guilty taking advantage of people like that." Almost. Bradley laughed and shared his own story about paying minimum wage to restaurant workers while charging $50 for entrees. Both men seemed genuinely puzzled by employees who wanted raises or better working conditions, as if the concept of struggling financially was completely foreign to them. Their conversation grew more animated as they tried to one-up each other with examples of their business ruthlessness. Marcus tried to tune them out, but their voices carried easily across the weight room. He'd heard similar conversations countless times before, wealthy men bragging about taking advantage of working people, while surrounded by the luxury their exploitation had bought them. It was particularly galling because Marcus knew he was probably smarter and more hard-working than either of them, but circumstances had placed them in different worlds. The morning crowd continued to grow, filling the gym with people who treated fitness as another status symbol rather than a necessity. Personal trainers hovered around their wealthy clients, providing constant praise and encouragement for mediocre efforts. Expensive workout clothes and accessories were displayed like peacock feathers, each person trying to signal their wealth and success through their gym attire. Marcus noticed how differently the staff treated the wealthy members, compared to regular people like himself. The trainers practically fought over the chance to work with Bradley and Connor, knowing they tipped well and provided referrals to other wealthy clients. Meanwhile, members who couldn't afford personal training were largely ignored, left to figure out their workouts alone or rely on the occasional advice from more experienced lifters. As Marcus moved to the squat rack, he overheard Bradley complaining to Kyle about his daughter's private school tuition. The man was genuinely upset about paying $25,000 per year for his child's education, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he thought teachers should be grateful to work for less money. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, who struggled to afford even basic school supplies for Emma, but would never dream of complaining about investing in her education. The conversation shifted to their weekend plans, with Connor describing his upcoming ski trip to Aspen and Bradley discussing his yacht purchase. They spoke casually about spending amounts that would change Marcus's life completely, treating $100,000 purchases like normal people discussed buying coffee. Their privilege was so complete they couldn't even imagine living any other way. Marcus completed his squat routine with methodical precision. Each rep performed with perfect form despite the distracting chatter around him. He'd learned to use their arrogance as motivation, channeling his frustration into physical strength. Every time he heard them dismiss working people as lazy or undeserving, he added another 5 pounds to his next set. The gym's atmosphere had completely changed from the quiet, focused environment Marcus preferred. Music pumped through expensive speakers while conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes echoed off the mirrored walls. Personal trainers shouted encouragement to clients who were paying premium prices for attention and motivation they could have found for free with a little self-discipline. Despite the chaos, Marcus maintained his focus and intensity. His workout was sacred time, the 90 minutes each day when he could work toward his goals without interruption or compromise. He'd learned to create a mental barrier around himself, blocking out the noise and distraction of people who would never understand his life or struggles. As he prepared for the final portion of his routine, Marcus checked the time on his phone. Emma's smiling face looked back at him from his lock screen, reminding him why he was here and what he was working toward. She had a school field trip coming up that he needed to pay for, and new soccer cleats that were becoming more necessary each day. Every rep he completed was another step toward providing her with the childhood she deserved, regardless of their financial circumstances. The deadlift platform sat in the corner of the weight room like an altar to serious strength training. Most of the wealthy gym members avoided it completely, preferring machines that required less skill and carried lower risk of embarrassment. For Marcus, it was the centerpiece of his workout, the exercise that had transformed not just his body but his entire mindset over the past 3 years. He loaded the Olympic barbell methodically, sliding 45-pound plates onto each side with practiced efficiency. The iron clanged softly as each plate settled into place, a sound that never failed to focus his mind and steady his nerves. Today he was attempting 315 pounds, just 5 pounds more than his previous personal record. It might not seem like much to an outsider, but Marcus knew that every pound represented hours of training, careful nutrition on a tight budget, and the kind of mental toughness that came from facing real adversity. Bradley and Connor had moved their conversation closer to the deadlift area, apparently fascinated by watching someone actually work hard instead of simply going through the motions. Their personal trainers hovered nearby, probably hoping to learn something they could incorporate into their expensive but ineffective training programs. Marcus tried to ignore their presence, but their voices carried clearly across the relatively quiet corner of the gym. "Look at this guy," Bradley said loudly, apparently not caring if Marcus could hear him. "Probably thinks he's some kind of power lifter or something. I bet he works construction or drives a truck." His tone carried the casual dismissiveness that wealthy people often used when discussing blue-collar workers, as if physical labor somehow made someone less intelligent or worthy of respect. Connor laughed and added his own commentary. "Yeah, these blue-collar guys always think they're tougher than everyone else because they can lift heavy things. It's probably the only skill he has." He gestured toward Marcus with obvious condescension. "I mean, what's the point of all that muscle if you're still going to be poor? At least we're smart enough to make money with our brains instead of our backs." Kyle, Bradley's personal trainer, tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. But his wealthy client wasn't interested in showing respect for another gym member. The trainer was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but didn't want to risk losing his high-paying client by defending a working-class stranger. It was a perfect example of how money corrupted every relationship, even professional ones that should have been based on mutual respect. Marcus took a deep breath and approached the loaded barbell. 315 pounds sat waiting for him, representing not just a physical challenge but a symbolic one. Every rep he'd performed over the past 3 years had led to this moment. Every early morning when he'd dragged himself out of bed despite exhaustion, every meal he'd carefully planned to maximize nutrition while minimizing cost. The morning crowd had grown larger, filling the gym with the usual mix of wealthy members and their expensive entourages. Personal trainers guided their clients through basic exercises while charging premium prices for services that any dedicated lifter could have provided for free. The contrast was stark between people who were serious about fitness and those who simply wanted to be seen in an expensive gym wearing designer workout clothes. As Marcus gripped the barbell, he thought about Emma sleeping peacefully at home, trusting him to return safely so they could start their day together. She believed in him completely, never doubting that her father could handle any challenge life threw at them. That faith was more powerful than any pre-workout supplement or motivational speech from a personal trainer. Bradley continued his commentary, apparently enjoying his audience of sycophants and fellow wealthy members. "I bet this guy thinks he's impressing someone with all that weight," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Doesn't he realize that real success isn't about how much you can lift? It's about how much you can earn. I probably make more in a week than he makes all year." The irony was rich, considering that Bradley had inherited his restaurant chain from his father and had never worked a physically demanding day in his life. His success came from being born into the right family, not from any special talent or work ethic. Meanwhile, Marcus had earned every pound on that barbell through dedication and sacrifice, building strength while working night shifts and raising a daughter alone. Marcus positioned himself over the barbell, his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands gripping the knurled steel with determination. The weight looked enormous from this angle, but he'd prepared for this moment through countless training sessions and careful progression. Every muscle in his body was ready, from his legs and glutes that would initiate the lift to his core and back that would maintain proper form throughout the movement. The gym seemed to quiet around him as Marcus focused entirely on the task at hand. Years of training had taught him to block out distractions and channel all his energy into perfect execution. He'd studied deadlift technique through online videos and articles, analyzing every detail of proper form because he couldn't afford to hire a coach or risk injury that would prevent him from working. Connor noticed the focused atmosphere and decided to add his own commentary to the situation. "This should be interesting," he said loud enough for nearby members to hear. "Let's see if all that blue-collar toughness actually translates into real strength. I bet he fails and makes a big scene about it." His friends laughed appreciatively, clearly enjoying the entertainment value of watching someone they considered beneath them attempt something challenging. The weight seemed to grow heavier as Marcus prepared for his attempt, but not because of the physical load. The psychological pressure of performing in front of people who were actively rooting for his failure added an extra dimension to the challenge. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to prove their assumptions about working-class people correct by failing spectacularly. But Marcus had faced worse pressure than this. He'd lifted Emma onto his shoulders during her mother's funeral, promising her that everything would be okay, even though his world was falling apart. He'd worked double shifts while battling exhaustion and depression, refusing to let his daughter see him break down. Compared to those moments, lifting 315 pounds seemed almost manageable. The barbell waited patiently, loaded with iron plates that represented more than just weight. They symbolized every challenge Marcus had overcome, every obstacle he'd pushed through, every moment when quitting would have been easier than continuing. This wasn't just about setting a personal record. It was about proving to himself that consistent effort and determination could overcome any disadvantage. Marcus bent down and gripped the barbell with both hands, his fingers wrapping around the cold steel with practiced precision. The weight felt solid and unmovable beneath his palms, like trying to lift a piece of the earth itself. He took several deep breaths, each one filling his lungs completely, and helping him focus his mind on the task ahead. The gym noise faded into background static as his world narrowed to just himself and the 315 pounds waiting to be conquered. His setup was perfect after years of practice and study. Feet planted firmly on the rubber platform, back straight and strong, shoulders positioned directly over the barbell. Every detail had been rehearsed countless times during lighter training sessions, building muscle memory that would serve him when the weight got heavy enough to test his limits. Marcus had learned that proper form wasn't just about efficiency. It was about survival when you couldn't afford medical bills or time off work for injuries. Bradley and Connor continued their running commentary from a safe distance, their voices carrying that particular brand of arrogance that came from never having to prove themselves through actual effort. They treated Marcus's attempt like entertainment, a circus act performed for their amusement by someone they considered fundamentally different from themselves. Their personal trainer stood nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to challenge clients who paid them more in a month than most people earned in a year. $5 says he can't even get it off the ground, Bradley announced to his small audience, pulling out his wallet with theatrical flair. These construction worker types always overestimate their abilities. All muscle, no technique. The casual cruelty in his voice was matched only by his complete ignorance about what Marcus actually did for work or how hard he'd trained to reach this moment. Connor eagerly accepted the bet, adding his own prediction about Marcus's inevitable failure. "I'll take that action," he said, producing his own expensive wallet. "Look at his form, though." No personal trainer would ever teach someone to deadlift like that. He's obviously self-taught, probably learned everything from YouTube videos. His mocking tone suggested that learning something yourself was somehow inferior to paying someone else to teach you. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Both wealthy men were criticizing Marcus for being self-taught, while their own fitness knowledge came entirely from expensive trainers who told them what they wanted to hear, rather than what they needed to know. Marcus had spent hundreds of hours studying proper technique, analyzing slow-motion videos of world-class lifters, and carefully practicing every detail of the movement until it became second nature. Marcus ignored their chatter and began his lift. The initial pull required every muscle in his body working in perfect coordination, from his feet driving into the ground to his hands maintaining their grip on the barbell. The weight came off the floor slowly but steadily, rising past his shins as his legs straightened and his torso began to come upright. So far, so good, but the hardest part was still ahead. The middle portion of the deadlift was where most people failed. The point where the barbell had to travel past the knees and the lifter's body position made the weight feel heaviest. Marcus had practiced this transition thousands of times with lighter weights, learning to keep the bar close to his body and maintain perfect posture even when every muscle was screaming for relief. His face remained calm and focused despite the enormous strain, showing none of the struggle that was happening internally. Bradley's expression began to change as he realized Marcus might actually complete the lift successfully. The wealthy restaurant owner had genuinely expected to watch someone fail, and was clearly disappointed that his entertainment wasn't going according to plan. His bet with Connor suddenly seemed less certain, and his usual confidence wavered as Marcus continued pulling the weight upward with steady determination. "Lucky beginner's strength," Bradley muttered, trying to save face with his audience. "Anyone can lift heavy for a few weeks before their body breaks down. Wait until he's been training for years like serious lifters." The comment revealed his complete ignorance about Marcus's training history and his desperate need to maintain his sense of superiority even when confronted with evidence that contradicted his assumptions. The barbell passed Marcus's knees and entered the final phase of the lift, where hip drive and posterior chain strength would determine success or failure. This was where 3 years of consistent training would pay off, where countless hours of practicing the movement pattern would either carry him to victory or leave him just short of his goal. Marcus had visualized this moment hundreds of times, imagining how it would feel to lock out a new personal record weight. Connor watched nervously as his easy bet started looking less secure. He'd expected to watch someone embarrass themselves and instead was witnessing a display of genuine strength and technique that made his own gym efforts look pathetic by comparison. His personal trainer was taking notes, probably planning to steal Marcus's training methods to use with other clients who actually wanted to get stronger rather than just maintain their appearance. The weight continued its upward journey with agonizing slowness, each inch representing another small victory in Marcus's personal battle against circumstances that had tried to define his limitations. He thought about Emma waiting at home, trusting him to return safely so they could share breakfast and talk about her upcoming school day. She believed her father could do anything, and moments like this proved she was right to have that faith. Marcus's body trembled slightly under the enormous load, but his determination never wavered. Years of working night shifts while raising a daughter alone had taught him that the human spirit could endure far more than most people ever realized. Physical strength was just one component of the equation. Mental toughness and emotional resilience were equally important when attempting something that pushed beyond your comfort zone. The barbell reached hip level, and Marcus began the final portion of the lift. His shoulders pulled back, his chest came up, and his hips drove forward to complete the movement with perfect form. The weight that had seemed impossible just moments before was now under his complete control, locked out in a position that demonstrated mastery of one of the most fundamental human movements. Bradley and Connor fell silent as Marcus held the weight at the top, their casual mockery replaced by grudging recognition that they were witnessing something genuinely impressive. Their expensive personal trainers looked on with professional interest, probably calculating how they could incorporate some of Marcus's obvious knowledge into their own training programs, without giving him credit for the techniques they'd learned by watching him work. The moment Marcus locked out the 315-pound deadlift, something shifted in the atmosphere of Iron Paradise Gym. The weight that had seemed impossible just minutes before now rested securely in his grip, held steady by years of dedicated training and unshakable determination. His form remained perfect despite the enormous load, shoulders back, chest up, and eyes focused straight ahead with quiet confidence that spoke louder than any boastful declaration could have. Bradley's mouth fell open slightly as he realized he'd just lost his bet in spectacular fashion. The man who'd spent thousands of dollars on supplements and personal training couldn't deadlift half the weight that Marcus had just moved with textbook technique. His expensive workout clothes and designer accessories suddenly seemed ridiculous compared to the raw display of strength and skill he'd just witnessed. From someone he'd dismissed as just another blue-collar worker. "Holy shit," Connor whispered, forgetting to maintain his usual arrogant composure. He'd expected to watch someone fail embarrassingly, and instead found himself witnessing a display of genuine athleticism that made his own gym efforts look like child's play. His personal trainer was frantically taking notes, probably trying to memorize Marcus's technique so he could teach it to other clients who actually cared about results rather than appearance. Marcus held the weight for several seconds, not to show off but to ensure complete control before beginning the descent. The controlled lowering was just as impressive as the lift itself, demonstrating the kind of strength and coordination that could only come from years of proper training. When the plates finally touched the platform with a satisfying thud, the silence in the surrounding area was complete. Kyle, Bradley's personal trainer, stepped forward with obvious professional interest. "Excuse me," he said respectfully, his entire demeanor different from the casual dismissiveness he'd shown earlier. "That was incredible technique. I've been training people for 8 years, and I rarely see deadlift form that clean, especially at that weight. Where did you learn to lift like that?" Marcus straightened up and wiped his hands on his towel, taking a moment to catch his breath before responding. "YouTube mostly," he said simply, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Studied videos of powerlifters and strongmen. Practiced with lighter weights until I got it right. Been working on it for about 3 years now." His humble response only made his achievement more impressive to the growing audience of gym members who'd stopped their own workouts to watch. The revelation that Marcus was entirely self-taught sent ripples through the crowd of wealthy members and their expensive trainers. These people spent hundreds of dollars per session for personalized instruction and still couldn't approach the level of skill they'd just witnessed from someone who'd learned everything through free online resources and dedicated practice. The economic implications weren't lost on anyone present. Bradley struggled to process what he'd just seen, his worldview challenged by evidence that contradicted everything he believed about social class and ability. 3 years? He repeated, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "You've only been training for 3 years?" The question revealed his assumption that serious strength took decades to develop, probably because his own minimal efforts had produced minimal results over a much longer time frame. "Started when my daughter was 5, Marcus explained, checking the time on his phone. Emma's picture smiled back at him from the lock screen, reminding him why he was here and what really mattered in his life. Needed something to help me stay strong for her after her mom passed away. Lifting became my therapy, I guess. His simple honesty cut through the gym's usual atmosphere of posturing and pretense like a knife. The mention of his daughter and deceased wife changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just some random working-class guy trying to prove something. He was a single father who'd turned to strength training as a way of coping with tragedy and maintaining his ability to care for his child. Even Bradley and Connor seemed sobered by the revelation, their casual cruelty replaced by something approaching respect. Connor looked genuinely uncomfortable now, probably remembering his earlier comments about Marcus's intelligence and worth as a human being. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly, his usual arrogance completely absent. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was perhaps the first sincere thing anyone had heard him say in the 3 years he'd been a member of the gym. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't elaborate on his personal tragedy. He'd learned that people often wanted more details about his struggles than he was comfortable sharing, treating his pain like entertainment or a way to make themselves feel better about their own privileged lives. Emma was the only person who needed to understand his full story, and she was too young to hear most of it. "What do you do for work?" Kyle asked, his professional curiosity getting the better of his discretion. The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Marcus to decide whether to reveal the truth about his employment or let these wealthy people continue making their assumptions about his life and circumstances. Marcus looked around at the circle of faces watching him expectantly, from the expensive personal trainers to the wealthy members who'd been mocking him just minutes before. He could lie or deflect, let them think he worked in construction or as a mechanic, anything that might seem more respectable than his actual job. Instead, he chose honesty, the same quality that had guided his parenting and his training for the past 3 years. "I'm a janitor," he said simply, his voice carrying no shame or apology. "Work nights at the office building downtown, clean offices for people who make more in a day than I do in a month. But it's honest work, and it lets me be home when Emma gets off school." His straightforward response was like a bomb going off in the middle of their privileged bubble. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person within earshot was forced to confront their own assumptions about intelligence, worth, and success. Here was someone they dismissed as beneath their notice, someone whose job they probably never thought about except when complaining about cleaning staff, demonstrating skills and dedication that none of them could match despite their wealth and advantages. Bradley's face went through several expressions as he processed this information. The man he'd been mocking and betting against wasn't just stronger than him. He was someone who cleaned the offices where Bradley conducted his business deals. The restaurant owner had probably walked past Marcus hundreds of times without ever seeing him as a real person with goals, dreams, and impressive abilities. Jessica from the front desk had been watching the entire scene unfold, and she stepped forward with obvious pride and satisfaction. "Marcus has been one of our most dedicated members for 3 years, she announced to the crowd. "Never missed a workout, always respectful to everyone, and clearly knows more about proper training than most of the people who pay for personal trainers." Her support felt like validation, recognition from someone who'd watched his journey from the beginning. The revelation that Marcus was a janitor sent shockwaves through the small crowd that had gathered around the deadlift platform. Bradley and Connor exchanged uncomfortable glances, both men suddenly realizing that they'd been openly mocking someone whose job it was to clean up after people exactly like them. Their casual cruelty now seemed not just inappropriate, but actively hostile towards someone who worked hard to maintain the very spaces where they conducted their privileged lives. Kyle stepped back respectfully, his professional trainer's eye taking in Marcus's physique with new understanding. "You built that strength working nights and training alone?" he asked, genuine admiration replacing his earlier dismissiveness. "Most of my clients have every advantage money can buy, and none of them could come close to what you just did." The comment stung Bradley visibly, since he was paying Kyle $300 per hour for results he clearly wasn't getting. Marcus began removing plates from the barbell methodically, his movements efficient and practiced. Each 45-pound plate was handled like it weighed nothing, a casual display of strength that drove home just how impressive his deadlift had been. Time management, he explained simply. When you only have 90 minutes and can't afford to waste any of it, you learn to focus on what actually works instead of what looks impressive. The surrounding gym members were processing what they'd witnessed, many of them probably reevaluating their own assumptions about social class and human worth. Here was concrete proof that dedication and intelligence weren't determined by income or job title, that someone they'd never bothered to notice was capable of achievements none of them could match despite their considerable advantages. Bradley cleared his throat awkwardly, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Look, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice lacking its earlier arrogance. "The things I said were completely out of line." "I had no idea," he trailed off, probably realizing that not knowing someone's story wasn't an excuse for treating them with contempt and disrespect. Marcus paused in his plate removal and looked at Bradley directly for the first time. "You didn't know I was listening," he said calmly, "but you knew someone was. The things you said about working people, about people like me, that's what you really think. The only thing you're sorry about is getting called out for it." His quiet dignity made Bradley's shallow apology seem even more inadequate. Connor shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to distance himself from the situation, but realizing he was equally guilty of the same prejudice and casual cruelty. "Marcus is right," he admitted reluctantly. "We both acted like jerks, and we owe you more than just an apology. What you just did was incredible, and we were too busy being snobs to recognize real strength when we saw it." The admission seemed to surprise everyone, including Connor himself. For a moment, his usual mask of superiority slipped completely, revealing someone who might actually be capable of growth and self-reflection. It wasn't much, but it was more than Marcus had expected from either of them when the morning started. Jessica approached the group with a clipboard, clearly having planned her intervention carefully. "Actually, since everyone's here, I have something to share," she announced. "Marcus, remember when you asked about the Employee Fitness Challenge last month? I submitted your numbers anyway, and you won. First place in the deadlift category, beating out over 200 participants from gyms across the city." Marcus looked genuinely surprised, his usual composure cracking slightly. "You entered me in the competition? I never signed up for anything like that." The news seemed to shock him more than his successful lift had, probably because he'd never thought of himself as competitive with anyone except his own previous performances. "The prize is $1,000 and a year of free personal training," Jessica continued, enjoying the looks of amazement from the wealthy members who'd been mocking Marcus just minutes before. "I figured someone who'd built that kind of strength while working nights and raising a daughter alone deserved some recognition for what he'd accomplished. The $1,000 would make a real difference in Marcus's life, probably covering Emma's school expenses for several months or allowing him to finally fix his car's engine problems. But more than the money, the recognition mattered. For 3 years, he'd trained in relative obscurity, pushing himself to achieve goals that nobody else even knew about. Bradley's face went through several more expressions as he processed this information. The man he'd dismissed as just another blue-collar worker wasn't just strong. He was officially one of the strongest people in the entire city. The bet Bradley had made seemed ridiculous now. $5 wagered against someone who could outlift professional athletes and serious powerlifters. Kyle was frantically writing notes, probably trying to figure out how to incorporate Marcus's training methods into his expensive programs. "Would you ever consider doing some personal training yourself?" he asked hopefully. "With your knowledge and results, you could probably make really good money helping other people get strong." "Way better than..." He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but everyone knew he was about to say way better than janitorial work. Marcus considered the question seriously while finishing his equipment cleanup. "Maybe someday," he said thoughtfully. "Right now, Emma needs me on a schedule she can count on. Night work lets me be there when she gets home from school, help with homework, make dinner together. Can't put a price on that." Consistency. His priorities were so clearly defined that it made the wealthy men's obsession with money seem almost childish by comparison. The crowd began to disperse as Marcus gathered his simple gym bag and prepared to leave. Several members approached him individually to offer congratulations or ask questions about his training, treating him with a respect that had been completely absent just an hour before. Word of his lift was already spreading through the gym, turning him from an invisible working-class member into something approaching a local legend. As Marcus walked toward the exit, Bradley called out one final time. "Hey, Marcus." When he turned around, the restaurant owner looked genuinely humbled. "I mean it about the apology. And if you ever want to bring your daughter to one of my restaurants, dinner's on me. It's the least I can do after the way I acted." The offer seemed sincere, even if it was motivated more by guilt than genuine friendship. Marcus nodded politely, but didn't commit to anything. He'd learned to be cautious about accepting favors from wealthy people, who sometimes use their generosity as a way to feel better about their previous bad behavior, without actually changing their underlying attitudes. Emma would probably enjoy a fancy dinner, but Marcus wanted to make sure it came from the right place. Walking through the gym's front doors into the morning sunlight, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the weight he'd lifted or the recognition he'd received. He'd stayed true to himself throughout the entire ordeal, refusing to be intimidated by wealth or impressed by status. More importantly, he'd proven that dedication and hard work could overcome almost any disadvantage. The drive home gave Marcus time to process what had happened and plan how he'd share the news with Emma. She'd be proud of his achievement, but more than that, she'd understand what it represented. Her father had once again proven that circumstances didn't define limitations, that people could accomplish remarkable things regardless of their job title or social status. As he pulled into his modest apartment complex, Marcus smiled thinking about the pancake breakfast he'd promised Emma and the school day ahead of them. The $1,000 would help with her upcoming field trip and new soccer cleats, but the real victory was knowing he'd modeled strength, dignity, and perseverance for the little girl who looked up to him as her hero. That lesson was worth more than any amount of money or recognition could ever be.